In the quiet town of Pine Valley, where the most thrilling event was usually Mrs. Henderson's award-winning petunias, something rather strange was beginning to take shape at 221 Maple Street. Retired Colonel Kyle Anderson, a man who had once led elite special forces units across 3 continents, was now seemingly obsessed with the art of birdhouse building. No, Ethan, you're holding that hammer like you're still defusing a bomb in Baghdad," Anderson called out across the garage workshop, his voice carrying that unmistakable drill sergeant tone that never quite faded with retirement. "This is delicate work we're doing here. We're building homes for birds, not breaching enemy fortifications." Ethan Brooks, a former Navy SEAL and current enthusiast of what he liked to call aggressive gardening, lowered the hammer with a knowing smirk. "Force of habit, Kyle. 20 years of high-stakes operations don't just vanish because we swapped our tactical gear for tool belts." To any casual observer, the garage, which could easily be mistaken for a quaint craftsman's workshop, had become the unofficial headquarters of Pine Valley's newest social group, the Sunday Hobby Club. To the untrained eye, it was just a bunch of retirees enjoying peaceful pastimes. But for those who looked closer, though, unfortunately, the recent alien visitors never did, there were subtle signs that something was off. The tools were arranged with precise care, and the hobbyists seemed to maintain constant awareness of all entrances and exits. "Hey, look who the retirement home dragged in," Anderson called out as Megan Fitzgerald pushed open the garage door. The former Air Force Strategic Operations Specialist had traded her military career for dabbling in electronics, though her dabbling might have made most engineering professors break a sweat. "Save it, Kyle," Megan shot back, carefully setting her tackle box of electronic components down on a workbench. "Some of us are actually trying to maintain our cover as productive members of society, unlike certain people who think bird mansions count as community service." Laughter filled the garage, the kind that could only come from people who'd shared experiences too intense for any civilian personnel file. Across the room, other club members were engrossed in their projects. Luke Harrison, a former Marine Corps intelligence officer, was meticulously cataloging his stamp collection, which just happened to form a pattern eerily similar to the local surveillance grid's coordinates. "Did anyone catch the news about our new visitors?" Anderson asked casually, measuring a piece of cedar with unnecessary precision. The mood in the room shifted subtly, like a storm brewing on the horizon. "Oh, you mean the cultural exchange delegation?" Ethan snorted, making air quotes with fingers that had once been trained to end conflicts in seconds. "Yeah, I noticed them. Fascinating how they're so interested in our hobbies." Anderson nodded, his weathered hands still steady over the wood. "3 of them walked past my house yesterday. Twice. They seemed awfully interested in our little get-togethers." "Well, we are a fascinating bunch," Megan said deadpan, soldering something that wasn't remotely a simple LED circuit. "Just a group of retirees pursuing wholesome activities to pass the time. Nothing suspicious about that." The room erupted into laughter again, but this time there was a sharp edge to it. If the aliens had understood human humor well enough, they might have found themselves quite nervous. "You know what's funny?" Luke spoke up, carefully placing a stamp in his album. "In all my years of service, I never had as much time to think, to plan, to really get creative as I do now. Retirement's an interesting thing. It gives you time to perfect all sorts of hobbies." Anderson glanced around at his team, because that's what they were, regardless of what the community bulletin board might say. These weren't just retirees. They were seasoned operators with decades of training, countless missions under their belts, and now, most dangerously of all, time on their hands. "Well then," Anderson said, placing the finished birdhouse on the workbench with deliberate care, "should we discuss next week's project?" The smiles that spread across the faces of the Sunday Hobby Club members would have sent their alien observers running for their ships, if only they knew enough about human expressions to distinguish between a grandfather's warm grin and a predator's menacing smile. After all, the most dangerous humans weren't the ones actively serving in the military. No, the most dangerous were those who had all the experience, none of the oversight, and plenty of time to get creative. It all started with the squirrels, of all things. Who would have thought that something as ordinary as a local infestation of squirrels would tip off a group of highly trained military veterans to an alien infiltration? But Pine Valley squirrels had suddenly developed impeccable table manners. "They're eating in formation," Ethan muttered one Wednesday morning, peering through his bird-watching binoculars at the park across from his prize-winning vegetable garden. "Since when do squirrels line up in perfect geometric patterns to eat acorns?" And that was only the beginning. The local teenagers had suddenly developed perfect posture and were speaking in complete sentences. Mrs. Henderson's prized petunias were growing in mathematically precise patterns. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the town council had started finishing their meetings on time and under budget. "Something's definitely off," Megan announced during the next Sunday meeting, spreading out what appeared to be a quilting pattern but was actually a detailed frequency analysis of local communications. "I've been picking up some interesting interference in my radio-controlled knitting needles." Luke looked up from his stamp album, his expression serious. "The military's blind to it. My contacts say they're focused on the obvious targets. Major cities, military installations, government facilities. No one's watching the small towns." "Classic misdirection," Anderson said, sanding a birdhouse with strokes that spelled out Morse code to anyone paying attention. "While they're looking for the big plays, the real infiltration was happening right under their noses, hidden in plain sight in a place just like Pine Valley. But why here?" Ethan, who had brought in a tray of suspicious-looking soil samples from his garden, asked, "What makes our little town so special?" "Location, location, location," Megan answered, her fingers moving quickly over what seemed like a simple cross-stitch pattern. "We're right at the intersection of 3 major transportation routes, with an old Cold War bunker system running beneath us. We're close enough to Anderson Air Force Base to be of interest, but far enough to remain off the radar." The garage went quiet, except for the sound of Anderson working steadily with his sandpaper. Each member of the hobby club processed this information the way only veterans with decades of experience could, calm and methodical. "The military's standard protocols are working against them," Luke said, placing a stamp in his collection that just happened to mark a location tied to a suspected alien anomaly. "They're looking for the usual signs of infiltration, odd tech signatures, unauthorized access attempts, or direct confrontations. But these visitors? They're in it for the long haul." Anderson nodded, his hands never stopping their work on the birdhouse. "They're weaving their influence into the fabric of our society, one thread at a time, so subtle that by the time anyone notices, it will already be too late." Megan's needles clicked in rhythm as she decoded another burst of strange frequencies. At that moment, the garage door opened, and without missing a beat, everyone slipped into their hobbyist poses, positions they had practiced with the same discipline once given to military stances. Standing in the doorway was one of the new cultural exchange advisors who had recently joined the town council. "Good afternoon," the being that called itself Zyril thus said, its smile just a little too wide, its blinks a little too perfectly timed. "I hope I'm not interrupting your crafting activities." "Not at all," Anderson grinned, his expression warm and grandfatherly as he held up his birdhouse. "We were just discussing the ideal angle for roof ventilation. Fascinating stuff, really. Would you like me to explain the detailed process of weatherproofing cedar?" The alien's eyes glazed over just slightly, exactly as planned. Nothing deflects suspicion better than an elderly hobbyist eager to explain their passion in excruciating detail. "Perhaps another time," Zyril said, stepping back slowly. "Please, continue with your quaint activities." As soon as the door closed, the hobby club dropped their act. "Did you catch that?" Ethan whispered, his hands now steady as they had been during countless covert operations. "The shimmer around the edges, how the air bent the wrong way." Megan nodded. "Their camouflage tech is impressive, but not perfect. They're getting bolder," Anderson remarked, his voice adopting the same tone he had used when briefing special operations teams. "That's the 3rd visit this week. They're trying to establish a baseline for our behavior." "Well," Luke said with a dark smile, "let's make sure we give them exactly what they expect, just a bunch of harmless retirees pursuing their hobbies." "Speaking of which," Megan interrupted, her fingers working furiously over her knitting, "I've just decoded some of their transmission frequencies. You won't believe what they're planning." The room tensed, decades of combat experience simmering beneath the surface of their casual positions. Anderson looked around at his team, not at their gray hair or reading glasses, but at the sharp minds and lethal skills that lay hidden beneath. "All right, folks," he said, reaching for what appeared to be a simple notebook, but was actually filled with military-grade tactical analyses disguised as craft supply inventories. "It's time to show these visitors why retired humans are the most dangerous humans of all." The smiles that spread across the faces of the hobby club members weren't peaceful or grandfatherly. They were the smiles of predators who had spent decades perfecting their craft and now had all the time in the world to plan their next move. After all, if there's one thing more dangerous than a highly trained warrior, it's a highly trained warrior with a hobby. Operation Craft Fair, what the Hobby Club had dubbed their intelligence-gathering mission, began on a bright and sunny Tuesday morning. The local community center was hosting its annual showcase of local talents, and every member of the club had entered their projects for display. "My quilt is picking up some fascinating radiation signatures," Megan Fitzgerald murmured into her teacup at her display booth. The seemingly innocent patchwork quilt was, in reality, a network of advanced sensors disguised as sequins and batting. "These visitors definitely aren't from around here, and I don't mean Albuquerque." "Copy that," came Ethan Brooks's voice from 2 booths over, where he proudly displayed his prize-winning tomatoes. Each vegetable had been carefully engineered to detect biochemical changes in the air. "My tomatoes are picking up some unusual atmospheric fluctuations whenever our new friends are nearby. Their environmental suits must be leaking." Luke Harrison, manning the stamp collection booth, wasn't just using his magnifying glass to examine postmarks. "Subjects approaching from the east entrance. 3 of them. Same shimmer effect as before. And would you look at that? They're trying to mimic our walking patterns. Poorly." The aliens, still posing as cultural exchange advisors, moved through the craft fair with robotic precision. They stopped at each booth for exactly 45 seconds, smiled for exactly 3 seconds, and nodded twice before moving on. "Amateurs," Anderson muttered from his birdhouse display. "Back in my day, we spent months studying cultural integration before going into deep cover operations. These people didn't even bother learning how to browse properly. No one looks at a decorative wind chime like that unless they're analyzing it mathematically." Megan stifled a laugh as she pretended to adjust her hearing aid, which was actually a sophisticated communications device. "Oh, you'll love this. I just intercepted some of their internal communications. They think we're displaying primitive defense technology. They believe my quilt is a rudimentary camouflage attempt." "If they only knew," Ethan chuckled, spraying his tomatoes with what looked like plain water, but was actually a compound designed to react with alien biochemistry. "By the way, did anyone else notice that they never touch anything? Not even a handshake or a casual brush in a crowded room. Tactical analysis suggests they're physically vulnerable to direct contact." Luke, carefully placing a fresh stamp in his album, marked yet another confirmed alien location, possibly due to incompatible biological or energy signatures. Anderson nodded thoughtfully, his hands continuing their rhythmic work on another birdhouse. "Megan, what's the latest on that frequency analysis?" "Better than expected," Megan answered, her fingers moving over her knitting as though she were counting stitches. "Their communication patterns are complex, but there's a structure to them, military structure. Whoever these visitors are, they're running this like a standard infiltration operation, only with really, really poor tradecraft." The craft fair rolled on, with the hobby club gathering more intel in 6 hours than the official military investigations had managed in months. Meanwhile, the aliens remained blissfully unaware that their every move was being scrutinized by veterans who had helped write the very covert operations manuals they were now failing to follow. That evening, the club reconvened in Anderson's garage for what was formally termed their Advanced Birdhouse Construction Seminar, which, of course, was actually a mission briefing. "All right, let's take stock of what we know," Anderson said, unfurling a piece of blueprint paper that, instead of birdhouse designs, displayed highly detailed tactical analyses of alien movements and capabilities. "They're physically vulnerable, they rely heavily on tech for disguise, and their operational habits are predictable." Ethan, placing one of his tomatoes on the workbench, noticed how it had changed color ever so slightly where an alien had passed nearby. They're leaving trace signatures everywhere, like rookies forgetting to clean up after themselves. Megan spread her quilt across another workbench, various sections lighting up with data. Their frequencies are intricate but predictable. They don't adapt or encrypt on the fly. It's like they've never heard of signals intelligence. Luke added, his tone growing serious. And most importantly, they're completely underestimating us. The reports I've intercepted, via my stamps, show they consider us irrelevant. Just harmless retirees pursuing some quaint hobbies. Anderson flashed a smile, the kind that once made enemy commanders wake up in cold sweats. Then let's use that perception to our advantage and plan Operation Knitting Circle. The next hour was dedicated to tactical planning, the kind of strategic thinking that would have made Pentagon officials weep with joy. Megan's quilt became a map, each section representing phases of their defensive strategy. Ethan's gardening tools were laid out, demonstrating infiltration routes. Luke's stamps marked key strategic points scattered throughout the town. The beauty of this, Anderson explained, adding another calculated mark to the plan, is that everything we need is already in place. They'll never guess that a quilting circle is actually a signals intelligence operation, or that a gardening club has been mapping their movements for weeks, or that the local birdwatching society has better surveillance than most intelligence agencies. Ethan grinned. The best part, Megan, looking up from her calculations, raised an eyebrow. We can deploy everything during next week's town festival. No one questions why retirees go all out for community events. Anderson's expression turned serious, though a glimmer of mischief sparkled in his eyes. Remember, we're not just defending Pine Valley. If we're right about their intentions, this could be happening in small towns all across the country. We need to make sure our response sends a very clear message. Oh, it will, Megan replied, holding up what appeared to be an innocent crochet hook, which was in fact a sophisticated energy pulse generator. By the time we're done, they'll think twice about underestimating retired humans. Poor things, Luke mused, arranging his stamps in what appeared to be a complex deployment schedule. They really should have done their homework. If they had, they'd know that humans don't get less dangerous when they retire. We just get more creative. Ethan finished adjusting the settings on his garden sprinkler system, which, of course, had nothing to do with watering plants. As the hobby club finalized their plans, their movements were as sharp and precise as they had been decades ago in operations around the world. The only difference now was that instead of high-tech military gear, they were using quilts, birdhouses, and gardening tools. The aliens didn't stand a chance. The Pine Valley Community Festival was just 3 days away, and Anderson's garage had transformed into what could only be described as the world's most innocuous-looking weapons facility. "Pass me that doily, will you?" Megan called from her workstation. What looked like a delicate lace piece was, in reality, a highly sophisticated web of conductive fibers designed to disrupt the aliens' energy signatures. I've calibrated it to match the frequency of their suits. One touch, and their camouflage will go haywire. Ethan was at his usual spot, but instead of preparing garden supplies, he was modifying his prize-winning hydroponic system. "My foot," he muttered, adjusting what appeared to be a simple watering mechanism. More like an electromagnetic pulse delivery system. Let's see how their high-tech suits handle a dose of old-school electrical interference. Luke had spread his stamp collection across 3 tables, each album arranged to create a grid pattern. "Tracking systems online," he announced, carefully placing a seemingly ordinary stamp into position. "These babies are actually quantum resonance markers. The moment one of our visitors steps into the grid, we'll know exactly where they are and what they're up to." Anderson stood at his workbench, finishing the final touches on what appeared to be an elaborate series of birdhouses. "Remember when we had to requisition millions of dollars in equipment for operations like this?" he asked, adjusting a hidden mechanism. "Now we're doing it with craft supplies and hardware store purchases." Megan grinned, holding up her finished doily to the light. The benefits of retirement? No paperwork, no bureaucracy. Just pure creativity. "Did I mention I've lined these with sensors calibrated to their specific biosignatures?" Megan asked, her voice full of pride. The garage buzzed with similar inventions, each more brilliant than the last. Ethan's garden gnomes, which had once simply adorned his yard, now held intricate motion detectors. Luke's commemorative plate collection wasn't just decorative. It had been transformed into sophisticated surveillance dishes. Even Anderson's wooden wind chimes, once a peaceful garden accent, had been carefully tuned to disrupt alien communication frequencies. "The best defense is the one they'll never see coming," Anderson said as he looked over their work. "Let's run through the festival layout one more time." He unfurled a large sheet of paper on his workbench, which appeared to be a harmless festival planning map, covered with notes about booth placements and schedules for various activities. But in truth, it was a highly detailed tactical plan that could have made military planners envious. "Megan, your quilting booth is here," he pointed to the map, marking a central location. "It's the perfect position for covering the main gathering area. Those doilies you've been working on will create an invisible net. The moment anyone tries to move through it, their suits will light up like Christmas trees." Megan added another layer of beads to her craft, but there was more than just decoration in her movements. Only on frequencies we can pick up, of course. To the untrained eye, they'll look like beautiful decorations. "Ethan, your garden display forms the perimeter," Anderson continued. "Those modified sprinkler systems will create a field of electromagnetically charged mist." Ethan nodded, adjusting the pressure gauges hidden inside his watering cans. "Completely harmless to humans, but it'll wreak havoc on their environmental systems. Plus, if anyone asks, I'm just trying to keep my prize plants healthy." "Luke's stamp collecting booth provides our surveillance hub," Anderson pointed to another spot on the map. "Those display cases are actually sensor arrays." Luke polished what seemed to be a vintage magnifying glass, but his movements revealed it was a high-tech scanning device. "They'll give us real-time data on every anomalous energy signature. It'll all look like an ordinary stamp collection." Anderson stepped back and admired the simplicity of their plan. "And my contribution ties it all together. These birdhouses, placed strategically around the festival grounds." He lifted one of his creations, showing the complex hidden mechanisms inside. What looks like ventilation holes are actually precisely calibrated energy disruptors. The weathered wood finish contains embedded frequency modulators. Even the perches are disguised signal repeaters. "Once everything's in position," he explained, "we'll have created a complete containment and neutralization grid, all disguised as ordinary festival decorations." Megan laughed, threading what appeared to be a normal needle, but was actually programming a quantum sensor. "What's really funny is that we're building a high-tech alien containment system out of arts and crafts supplies. I can't help but wonder what we could have done back in active service if they had just let us get creative." Ethan fiddled with one of his modified garden tools, testing the range. Instead of all those pricey gadgets, sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Luke nodded in agreement as he placed another stamp in position. Who needs millions in equipment when you've got experience, ingenuity, and a senior discount at the craft store? Anderson checked their inventory one final time. Every item appeared innocuous to an outsider, but when combined, they formed one of the most sophisticated defense systems ever conceived, built entirely from materials you could find at any local hobby shop or garden center. "Remember," he addressed his team, "the key is to keep our cover until the very last moment. We're just a bunch of retirees sharing our hobbies at the festival. Nothing more, right?" Megan's smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Just a bunch of harmless senior citizens with our quilts and doilies." "Our garden displays and prize vegetables," Ethan added. "Our stamp collections and commemorative plates," Luke chimed in. "And some lovely handcrafted birdhouses," Anderson finished with a grin, "all of which happen to be capable of completely neutralizing an alien infiltration force." The garage filled with laughter, a sound that only came from those who knew they were about to execute something extraordinary. Each member of the hobby club returned to their workstations, adding final touches to their creative weapons of mass disruption. Ethan tested the spread pattern of his Plantmeister, now designed to deliver a precise electromagnetic pulse. Megan made subtle adjustments to her quantum-encoded quilting patterns. Luke calibrated the surveillance grid within his stamp displays, and Anderson fine-tuned the energy disruptors hidden in his birdhouses. "You know," Anderson said thoughtfully, adjusting his last birdhouse, "I almost feel sorry for them. They came looking for an easy target and ended up in a retirement community full of bored veterans with too much time on their hands." Megan held up her completed doily with satisfaction. Probably not what they expected. The mistake, Ethan grinned, checking his modified garden tools for the final time, was thinking that retired means harmless. It just means we've had time to get really, really creative. Luke snapped his stamp album shut with finality. The trap's set. All that was left now was to wait for the visitors to spring it. As the members of the hobby club surveyed their arsenal of weaponized crafts, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. After all, who else could say they defended Earth with nothing more than hobby supplies and decades of military expertise? The aliens were about to learn a crucial lesson about underestimating elderly humans and their seemingly harmless hobbies. The Pine Valley Community Festival was in full swing, a picturesque small-town gathering that would have made Norman Rockwell himself want to pick up a paintbrush. Banners fluttered in the breeze, children ran around with sticky cotton candy faces, and the air was filled with the scent of popcorn and freshly cut grass. And scattered throughout this idyllic scene, disguised as festival decorations, was enough repurposed technology to make Area 51 green with envy. 7 targets approaching the east entrance. Luke Harrison's voice crackled through the comms. Megan Fitzgerald's modified hearing aid buzzed softly, a signal that her sensors were picking up activity. She was hunched over her knitting, pretending to focus on a stitch, while her hidden senses tracked every movement of the alien delegation. They still maintained their human disguises, but the shimmer effect was more noticeable today. "Must be the humidity," Ethan Brooks murmured from his garden display, casually adjusting his sprinkler system. "Their environmental suits are working overtime. Perfect conditions for what we've got planned." Anderson stood at his birdhouse booth, wearing a warm, grandfatherly smile as the delegation approached. Zerylthos, their leader, walked with that unnervingly perfect posture, an unmistakable sign to anyone trained to spot the anomaly. "Ready on my mark," Anderson whispered, making it look like he was just adjusting one of his birdhouses. "Quantum mesh is active," Megan confirmed, pretending to adjust her display of quilts and doilies. "They'll hit the first trigger point in 3, 2, 1. As Zerylthos and his companions entered Megan's invisible net of quantum-encoded fibers, their human disguises flickered for a split second, revealing glimpses of their true forms. To any casual observer, it would have seemed like a trick of the light. "Phase 1 complete," Megan said quietly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Their suit frequencies are locked in," Ethan replied, his voice casually cheerful as he activated his modified sprinkler system. A fine mist began to spread over the festival grounds, drawing grateful comments from overheated festival goers. No one noticed that the water particles were carrying a precisely calibrated electromagnetic charge. The aliens' movements started to become less fluid, their once perfectly controlled gestures slipping. Zerylthos' smile faltered, twisting into something closer to a grimace. "Their environmental controls are failing," Luke reported from his surveillance post. "Vital signs showing stress. They're compensating, but—" "Time for the bird chorus," Anderson interjected, reaching for the small remote control disguised as a woodworking tool. With a single click, every birdhouse he'd placed around the festival came to life, activating their hidden sonic disruptors. To the human ear, it sounded like cheerful birdsong. To the aliens, it was an assault on their communication systems. Zerylthos staggered, his perfect posture faltering, and his companions began to huddle together, their movements becoming more erratic. The disguise they wore began to fail more frequently, causing murmurs of confusion from nearby festival goers. "That's right," Megan muttered under her breath, pretending to count stitches as she monitored the situation through her modified reading glasses. "Come a little closer to my quilting display." The alien delegation, clearly seeking cover, moved exactly where the hobby club had predicted, right into the center of Megan's booth, surrounded by her seemingly innocent handiwork. "Now," Anderson commanded, his voice sharp. In perfect synchronization, the trap was sprung. Ethan's mist system intensified, creating a localized electromagnetic storm. Luke's hidden sensors locked onto their targets with military precision. Megan's quantum-encoded fabrics activated, forming an impenetrable containment field around the aliens. And Anderson's birdhouses emitted a final, precisely tuned pulse that shattered the aliens' remaining technological defenses. The result was nothing short of spectacular, though subtle. To the festival goers, it looked like nothing more than a brief power flicker and an odd play of light. But when the effects settled, Zeralthos and his companions stood revealed in their true forms, their human disguises utterly neutralized. "Well, well, well," Anderson said pleasantly, stepping forward with the calm demeanor of someone who'd encountered far stranger things in his military career. "Looks like we need to have a little chat about proper visitation protocols." The aliens, now shimmering with bioluminescence, stared in stunned silence at the elderly humans who had outmaneuvered them so completely. "By the way," Megan added, still knitting calmly as her quantum containment field held the visitors securely in place, "your infiltration technique needs some work. Next time, try actually learning how humans browse at craft fairs. 45 seconds per item is a dead giveaway." "And your environmental suits," Ethan chimed in, adjusting the settings on his garden tools. "Might want to upgrade those. They leak worse than my old coffee maker." Luke snapped his stamp album shut with a satisfied click. "Also, if you're going to use military protocols, at least catch up with the last century's advancements. Your communication encryption is practically antique." The aliens, finally finding their voice, spoke in perfect unison. How did you detect us? How did you turn arts and craft supplies into a containment system?" Anderson smiled, the kind of smile that had once made enemy commanders reconsider their life choices. "That's the thing about retired humans, especially retired military humans. We've got experience, ingenuity, and most importantly, hobbies." The hobby club members finished in unison, standing proudly among their weaponized craft projects, surrounded by oblivious festival goers still fixated on cotton candy and carnival games. To any alien races watching, the message was clear. Earth's retired defenders weren't just dangerous, they were dangerously creative. 3 months later, after the Pine Valley Community Festival incident, the hobby club was back in Anderson's garage, celebrating their victory with coffee and Megan's quantum-encrypted cookies. "Have you seen the latest intergalactic chatter?" Luke asked, sorting through his stamp collection, now including several highly unusual specimens that definitely weren't from any earthly postal service. "Our little festival demonstration has gone viral, so to speak." Megan glanced up from her latest project, a quilt that theoretically could bend space-time. "Oh, do tell." Luke grinned, holding up one of his alien stamps under his special magnifying glass. "We've been officially classified as a Level 5 retirement zone. That's higher than most military bases." Ethan nearly spilled his coffee. "A Level 5? Isn't that reserved for sectors too dangerous to infiltrate?" Anderson finished the final touches on a birdhouse that could probably achieve low orbit. "Indeed it is. Seems our creative approach to planetary defense made quite an impression." Megan pulled out her modified tablet, which looked like a crossword puzzle book. "Listen to this intercept." "I picked up something interesting last week," Megan said, her fingers working deftly on her cross-stitch. "A warning for all reconnaissance units. Extreme caution advised when approaching Earth's small towns. Special attention must be given to areas with a high concentration of human retirees engaged in recreational crafting activities." The garage filled with laughter. "Oh, but wait, it gets even better," she added, scrolling through her tablet with a smirk. "They've even added a specific note about craft fairs and community festivals. Apparently, we've been officially listed as experts in weaponized leisure activities." "My favorite part," Ethan said, carefully tending to his garden of unusually sophisticated vegetables, "is the official title they've given us. What was it again, Luke?" Luke cleared his throat dramatically, then read from one of his special stamps. "Elderly Terran Defense Force. Most dangerous when apparently harmless." "They even designed a warning symbol for us," Luke added with a grin. "It's a rocking chair with crossed knitting needles." Anderson leaned back in his workshop chair, a satisfied grin playing on his face. "The real irony here is that we're actually more effective now than we ever were in active service." "How do you figure?" Ethan asked, though his grin already suggested he knew exactly where this was going. "Think about it," Anderson said, gesturing with a screwdriver that may or may not have been capable of detecting quantum fluctuations. "Back in the day, we had rules, protocols, regulations, but now, We've got experience, creativity, and senior discounts at every hobby store in town. Megan's knitting needles clicked with unusual precision. And no one ever suspects the flower arrangement committee of packing antimatter containment fields or the birdhouse builder of having orbital defense capabilities. Speaking of which, Luke interjected, you won't believe who just added Earth's retirement communities to their places to avoid list. The Zan Empire. Yeah, the ones who just conquered the Andromeda Galaxy last month. Well, Anderson said, standing up to grab a fresh pot of coffee, I guess they've finally learned what every rookie soldier eventually figures out. It's not the weapons that make a warrior dangerous. It's the creativity. The club finished his thought in unison, chuckling as they slipped back into their weekly routine, brainstorming their next big projects. Meanwhile, high above Pine Valley, a small alien observation probe hovered silently, quickly marking the area as completely off-limits, updating the galactic database with a new warning. Caution. Earth's retired defenders have hobbies. Approach at your own risk. The probe shot off at maximum speed, leaving behind a planet where the most dangerous weapons weren't stashed in secret laboratories or military bases. They were hidden in plain sight, carefully crafted in the corners of quiet craft rooms and workshops in small towns across the world. After all, retirement didn't make Earth's defenders less dangerous. It just gave them time to get really creative.